Okay, before the break, we kind of put together a JavaFX table, created a data class to put in there. Well, as soon as Zoom buttons get out of my way, I will click the run button. We got up about this far. Got a couple things on there, some input boxes, and probably some labels on those. That might be useful. What's the property I need? Do I have it in my example here? Oh, yes. Instead of a label, since you might want to see this at some point, on those text boxes, before I put them in, I'll do it right here. So txt name, I've set prompt text, and that's the sometimes called a hint, sometimes called placeholder, the grayed out text that we can use instead of a label. Very, very useful to see there. And this one will be for name. Copy that, paste it a couple times, and I've stated before, it's actually more productive to work down the columns instead of across, because we end up with things like this all the time in our code. And if you work across, you have to keep changing your mindset back and forth. If you go down, you just change mindset once. So it's like, okay, I'm only thinking about the names. Got text name, text age, text town. You can change your frame of mind once and go down the next column. You got name, and age, and then town. That throws a lot of people off because we have it drilled into our head, work left to right, top to bottom. But that's not always the most productive way to do it. I haven't had a really good situation to do it yet here, but there's also the zoom way out, which I don't think is going to work here, is it? No. View. You don't have as good of a zoom in like a basic text editor. Sometimes when you're not seeing a bug, we can kind of see it here. No, our code forms patterns, right? Like little geometric shapes. Sometimes if you're not seeing a bug and you've stared at the code for too long, it really can be helpful at times to just zoom way out where you can't even read the text anymore. But all you can see is that pattern. And then a break in that pattern will jump off the page. Will jump off right off that. You'll see the break in the pattern. But I know something's different there. Something's out of place. Different little tricks that can be helpful. It's not always linear, left to right, top to bottom. It's almost never the best way to do it. So look for other patterns and little tricks that can be useful. Okay, now we should have some labels in those so we can see what goes in which box. Type in some stuff and then add it to the table and remove it. Let's do the add button first. That's straightforward, nothing new when we do the add button. So I'll come up here. Our buttons have global scope, so I'll put it what we saw the other day. So button add, and we'll just do it on a regular click. So set on action, just our basic thing. And an event handler, so a new event handler, that takes in an action handler. So we have a whole bunch of new objects nested together, references and classes built up inside of there. Or that was finally replaced by Lambda events. So we could say on action, so I'll say A for add this time. And then our Lambda, or the arrow, or whatever makes the most sense for that symbol in your mind. It is supposed to represent a Lambda. Then we need some curly braces. And don't forget the semicolon at the end, because this is a single line of code, even though it has an entire block of code in it. And I'll make a method called add person. Whenever we click the button, add a person, and in the example when I was getting prepared, I didn't bother to pass in any parameters, so we could probably do it ways other than lambda, but that's what we usually do. Then we can come down here and create that method. So public, we'll see it in the table. We don't need to return anything to code because this is going to be a graphical thing. Public void, add person. Probably don't need any parameters. What we will need is some new person data to put in there. And we only have the one constructor. So our only option is to use the empty constructor and then a bunch of setters. So person P is a new person. And yeah, we only have the one option on constructor. And then we have setters though. So P dot set name. And the name we want should be in that text box by the time this is called. So we want txt name dot get text, which is going to be a string. So that'll go in just fine. Age we'll have to adjust, but it's something we've seen before. So set age, and then the set age method takes in an integer, but our text box has a string in it. So, well, it's going to be txt age dot get text, but that's a string, so we need to do integer, the static integer class dot parse int. Whoops. And one more close. So we have to parse the integer out of the text box. We can also put, in a real setting, it would probably be, wouldn't be a bad idea to add some error handling to make sure there's only numbers in the text box. We don't allow for letters, but that's just applying a filter. Nothing fancy there, and it would eat away a lot of the class time, which we don't have very much of. And set town again is string data, so we can just grab it right from the text box. txt town dot get text. And now we should be able to add that to our table. And we do that the same way we normally add stuff in JavaFX. Right? The generic one is get children. If we know more specifically what goes there, we can put it like in the table earlier. We said we knew it was columns. So we said get columns. And we got the list of all the columns and then added some to it. But tables have more than that, right? Tables also have items. So we can use that one. So our table people dot get items. So the actual individual data records, I suppose, each item would be a record. So there's also cells and columns and rows, lots of different ones. But the thing we built up with all our factories. So our data class is the item, the table that goes in the table. Lots of ways we can get to it, but get columns and get items are the two we want to use. And then add all. And then that new person that we added. So hopefully nothing there took you by surprise. Might not have seen the get text method yet, but you probably could have already guessed there was a get text method built in there, right? We would certainly expect that from our text inputs. Something would be very wrong if we didn't have a get text on the text field widgets, components, or controls. So now I can try to add some stuff. So I put in my name, my age. I live in Clarksville. We hit add. It shows up on our table. Well, it doesn't look as good on the screen in front of me. On my computer screen, there's more blue and the coloring line on the line stands out. Maybe if I added some more data. Clearing this might be useful too. Should probably add that in there. So making up some more names. So there's at least two things. Sally, who's 21 from Salem, add her to the table. And Charlie, who's 53 from Charlestown, add him to the table. And Corey, who's 17 from Corrigan. Maybe Alani, who's 38 from Lanesville. That's really good. But there's a little bit of data, and you can see we have those table properties we would expect, including basic filtering already built in. If I come click name, organizes it by name or age. Or town, and we can start filtering our data, adjusting it. So I'm going to click one of these, and then I'll hold Control and click another one. It just changed, so it looks like I can't make multiple selections. Shift, and it's still only letting me select one at a time. So we do have control over that. And we need to do our remove button and add a whole bunch of things to the table. I'll do the remove button first because it's similar to what we would need when we add a whole bunch of things. Because data could be very dynamic while our program is running. And not just that, we did it all with factories, so it's going to be even more dynamic. We didn't keep the objects around. We created it, threw the output on the screen, and then deleted it. So the only remaining remnant of it is on the screen. So we need our observables to tell us what, we need our observers to tell us what the observables are doing. So that's the sort of list we'll need to remove things. I'll add through the method call. So button remove dot set on action. I'll call it R this time because the name doesn't necessarily matter. R seems like a good one for remove. And this will call a method called remove person. And I'm going to come up here and I'll go ahead and set this up. That thing I just pointed at, we have to select things one at a time, or we have to take control of that ourselves. And that's going to be our selection mode. And it follows a pattern, but it's a lot to type. So our table, we need to get selection model. And after we get selection model, we'll set the selection model. So that seems a little strange, but the get selection model returns a list of things we could have. And then from the list of things applied, the model, we get all of our models and we'll set selection mode. So get the model so you can set them, get the list of models so you can set the mode for one of them. And then our options are basically from an enum, we have selection mode dot single or multiple. Single's the default, and selection mode. Oh, why is that not? Oh, do I have to import it? There we go. Now it should be on the predicted text list. Single mode dot, and you can see there's two options that you could probably already guess what they could have guessed what they are. We can either select a single thing or multiple things. I'm just going to leave it as single right now. That way we can delete items one at a time. When we click our remove button, and we'll call this, come down here and call a method, and 99% of the methods on GUIs are either voids or booleans. And the ones that return booleans could really be voids, just in case you want to confirm that the stuff happened. You want to actually be certain that it happened before moving on to the next step. We don't do a whole lot of returning afterwards when we just change the graphics. What I call it, remove person. And to do this, we have to look at all of the observables our observer knows about. We have several observers. That's what all our columns are. We have observers checking the names and the ages and the towns, and together they're building up inside it, keeping an eye on all of the people or person data in our table. So that's an observable. So it's being watched for changes. So we don't want to just grab a list. We want to actually grab an observable list of person data. I'll call it all people. Is our table dot get items. Whoops, I don't know where the rest of that came from. Which kind of looks like what we added, right? We added items. If we stop at that list that we added things to, what we actually get back is an observable list. Oops, wrong button. And make sure it's the JavaFX observable list. Then once we have that, we can make a comparable list of selected things. This way it will work if we change our selection mode from single to multiple, because we can have a list of only one thing. So it'll work for single mode. And if we want to change to multiple selection, we need a list for lots of things. So we'll also make an observable list for person data, selected people, and that will be the table dot get selection model dot get selected items. So once you see it there, all the names should make sense, right? That nice part of spelling everything out in Java. Might take a little bit longer to type, but once you see it, the name, that nice spelled out name should help make sense of the code. So then we have a list of all of our data, along with a list of just our selected data. So we can just walk through and do a comparison. So it is a list. It's a type of doubly linked list. Did we do doubly linked list or with the list? Oh, that structure is next week. You probably saw a list in your 140 class. Like instead of the solid rigid structure like an array, a list that just has a pointer to the next item. A doubly linked list has a pointer to the previous one as well. So we can go both ways to traverse the list. So it's a double linked list, so we have a lot of built-in things such as a for each method. So selected people dot for each, and you see in the here we need a consumer for each element in our list, something that can consume it and work with it. And it just so happens that this is another use for Lambda functions, is they can consume any type of data we have in our program. A Lambda function can wait. That's what we saw earlier with the buttons. It can wait for the event, or it can consume anything we hand to it. So on our for each, oops, I don't need that E. For each, we can set up, it's another Lambda function. So I'll put S for selected, then that Lambda. And I like to go ahead and put the curly brace and then come back and do what's inside the block, because it's just so easy to forget the semicolon at the end. Or come back to the block with the curly braces after remembering to put that. And what we're going to do is for each one, we will just remove it from our other list if it's there. Right? Because we saw that with array list and linked list, the dot remove, we can pass in an object or an index. So we have an object from the selected one, so if we pass in the object, it'll just remove it from the other list. So in my example, I just used this again. I can't remember if there was a reason why I did that, since I have a reference for it. This list we made, all people dot remove S. I think I did that when somebody asked a question. I pulled up the example from 2019, so that was a while ago. I think somebody asked questions and skipped over the reference value and was like, yeah, we can just put this right here. Just list it out there. But does that make sense? We made both lists, and then we just walk through we walk through the selected and compare it, and if it's in the other one, go ahead and take it out, which is based off the same thing, so it has to be in the other one. So it's better to walk through the shorter one to compare to the long one. Yeah, if you think about that for a moment, it should make sense if it doesn't immediately. Better to walk through the shorter one than to walk through the longer one. So I need some data. A, 2, Z, B, 3, Y, C, 4, X. And I forgot I was going to do the add button should probably also clear out that text. That's just set the text field dot set text to an empty string. I guess we are kind of coming on a reasonable time to wrap up. So maybe this B one is wrong. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to hit remove. It should pull it off our list. So we can add stuff or remove it. So maybe it should have been B5Y and add that. But we now have a way to add and remove things from the list. And briefly introducing observables and the core idea there, and factories, and a lot of very powerful tools that you will use further later. Is yours not working, Noah?
Well, it's only removing one
Oh, so did you set the selection mode to multiple? I changed mine back to single. So if we do selection mode multiple, we should be able to remove more than one at a time. But at this point, still have to add them one at a time. Let's see. A1 Z B2 Y C3 X, and if I select that one, so now with multiple, it's like both of them, and that should pull them both off. Is yours not doing that?
Okay, now it's.
Yes, so we do have to set up the selection model. Oh, yes, I guess it's, remember, sequence is important. The selection model is set up well ahead of even loading the function to wait for into the Lambda. So order still matters. We haven't focused on that in a while, but as it gets complicated, things get more and more complicated. It'll start showing up a lot more. What else do we have here? I guess if we wanted to add a whole bunch of data right off the bat, kind of like reading from a database. It would be like this observable list thing. So let's do a public observable list. So when we say get items, we grab the observable list and then we say add all. So what we're actually adding all is another observable list. So if we need to add a bunch of data like what we would grab from a database, and at this point you can probably see why this is stretched out over several classes, because I took several classes and then this took a whole night. And took several other days of JavaFX just to get to where we could do this one. I'll call it get people. That seems like a good name for it. We need to create an observable list of people, obviously, because that's what we're going to return. Oh, I have to put that up here, don't I? Don't forget your generic type in the return. Oh, not people, person. I'll call it OL for observable list because it's just a temporary thing. There's lots of different names we could do. Folks, that's a good name for it. Fits with people. And this we have to initialize in a special way. So what we want to do is call the FX collections. Actually, it's an interface. Maybe object, whatever makes the most sense. It's technically an interface, but using it this way, it would probably make a lot more sense to call it an object because we need a method from it. But the FX collections has an observable, actually has lots of things, but one of the things it has is an observable array list. It's a nice way to bring that in. And then import FX collections, which there's probably not many things called FX collections in all of the Java libraries. Some things you got to watch closer than others, right? Like a button. There's going to be a lot of libraries with button in there. Or node is a big one. We're going to see that in just about every data structure we talk about next week is going to have a node. Starting next week, it's going to have a node in it. So there are a lot of libraries with node data. And then every one of our class examples is going to make our own class call, and we're going to call it node. And we'll probably have at least one self-referencing class. So we'll have a class called node that has an inner class called node. So then we'll have node.node. Just because it's the conventional way to name it in a classroom for some reason. But back here, then we can just add to that list. So like folks.add new person. Actually, I'm going to need another constructor to do it this way. I'm going to come over here and generate the full constructor so we can put it in there. So alt insert for in NetBeans. Every IDE should be able to type the mindless repetitive code. This way we don't have to put a bunch of getters and setters into that add method. Or make it more complicated, we can just put them right in the constructor. New person, I'll use those same names, Sally, who's 32 from Salem. Folks, add a new person, Lonnie, who's 58 from Lanesville. Folks, add new person, Alan, who's 14 from New Albany. Oops, typo right there. Folks, add new person, maybe a Shelley, who's 31 from Sillersburg. And then once we have our list, then we can just return that list. So all of that should look familiar. The thing that's new is what type of list we have. Excuse me. And setting up an observable list. And then we can add this up here. This would be more based off what the actual database has at the given point in time. So when we create our table, do I want to do this before the selection model or after? Let me, for example. I can find it in the example. So it does need to go after the selection model. So table people dot get items dot, or sorry, not get items, set items. And then we can call that get people method. Let's save that. So the order does matter. You want to set the selection mode before adding items to it. Earlier, it didn't matter because the whole table was there way before we could click on the add button. But here it's at computer speed, so it does need to follow that sequence. So then we have some stuff. We could add a new person to the table. Jeff, who's 22 from Jeffersonville. Do all our filtering, put it in order, maybe take Sally out of the table. And we can do stuff with our table. I guess this is probably what you would do with Java. Moving forward in the world, this is probably the part of JavaFX that would stick around. the full desktop applications, the fancy things like that standard appearance GUI was talking about the other day. Maybe not so much, but tying into a database and keeping it local to add security concerns, that might be a little bit more common. So you can see it's not, it's fairly straightforward as we get rolling with it. And it introduced a couple new topics that you will see that are very, very powerful in Java. So instead of constructors where we create the perfect object and carefully hold that and carefully carry it through our software and use it at every spot we need it and take care of it, we just quickly spit out a bunch of disposable objects and trash them as quickly as we can throw them out. A factory the same way we use factory in our modern industrial age, just the virtual version. And sometimes things can be dynamic and we need to observe, keep track of the dynamically changing stuff. So for that, we have observers and observables. So observables are going to change dynamically, eventually very, very dynamically, like dynamically on the fly changing already compiled code. Obviously that doesn't show up in an introduction class, but I at least want to mention it because it's a really awesome thing. It's a very powerful thing we can do with a computer. But at the very least, our data is going to change and those filters. And as we build more filters, right? Set it up so we can layer the filters, right? Put the names in order, and then after the last names are in order, then put it by age, right? And multiple filters on tables, y'all have probably seen that. It's hard to come up with an example of that with only 3 columns, but in real data situations where there's 30 columns, it's a lot easier to find ways to nest the filtering. It's going to be changing quickly. So we have the observables, and then we have another thing that is an observer, things which are observers, and we'll let the rest of our software know when one of those dynamic things has changed. So some very powerful tools being introduced here. Be aware of them. Definitely play around with tables and build tables, see what you can do, add some stuff, pull up that the predictive text box, see what's on there. You notice there's a lot of SA linked variable names. So there's little ambiguity to the method names. They say exactly what they do, but it's an active subject. We learn by doing. That's everything I had that I wanted to show on those. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, I assume 5 seconds of silence means no questions. If you have any, let me know. As always, I'll be sitting here until 8:50, our scheduled time, waiting for questions to come my way. Otherwise, you all have a great weekend, and I will see you next week on Tuesday. Yeah, see you on Tuesday, and we will get into data structures.